Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Tim Kelley and Keith Merron, and the first of a series of videos on men, power, and the search for a healthy masculine. So we're doing a bunch of these on a variety of topics relating to men, relating to power, relating to men in society, men in relationship, all sorts of different things. How that affects men and how that affects our goal, and hopefully your goal, to find and express a healthy masculine in the world. Keith, anything you want to add about our
Nothing
overview?
other than I saw you do this when you were putting it's kind of like that's the feeling that I have is we've been talking about this for 25 years, a long, long time. And we, of course, we work with a lot of men and a lot of people. But in our work with the workshops, Sword and Scepter, we're working with men around healthy masculine. And I know it is for you, but it's certainly for me just a joy over
Absolutely.
these 25 years to explore this and to share it and then to deepen it. And now we get a chance, well, not true. Now we choose to share it more fully
To,
with the
to
rest of the
discuss it
world.
to discuss in public the things we often
Yes.
chat about in private. So yeah,
Whew.
good.
That's right. That's right.
Excellent.
Exactly.
So today's topic is going to be about the evolving role and the evolving view of men in society.
Yeah.
And before we get into that, I want to introduce myself and introduce Keith. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Tim Kelley. I'm the author of True Purpose. I find the higher purpose of leaders, of organizations, of countries. I also help counseled leaders get back in the game and speak about self-organization and a variety of other topics, all with the intent of transforming society into heaven on earth. And my colleague and friend Keith Merron here has a doctorate from Harvard, wrote a book on gender intelligence, which is why I'm interviewing him today. There'll be other times when he's interviewing me. As well as what, 7 other books? How many books have you written, Keith? You've written a lot of books.
6 other books and 2 in the works.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you've got me by several there. I've
Yeah.
only really got the one and a few co-authorships. But Keith
Well,
also has taught in business schools. He has been a consultant for what, 50 years, something like that?
thank
40.
you. Since I was 3 years old. No, for 40 years.
40
40 years.
years. Excellent. A consultant for 40 years. And worked with many leaders on a variety of topics. And some of those topics are very adjacent to this whole masculinity and power thing. And today I'm going to be tapping your brain and your skills and your knowledge on this gender intelligence thing to see if we can unpack this thing called man. Anything else you want to say about yourself or me, Keith?
Good enough for now.
Mhm.
I've consulted over the 40 years, well over 400 businesses, helping them grow and develop their culture and creating a healthy organizational system.
Yep, yep.
That's been my primary work, and I also do a lot of work in executive coaching and developing a model for coaching that will probably eke in here somewhere along the way. That model is getting root in the coaching industry. So we should also mention you'll be interviewing me, but I'll also be interviewing you, and we're going to be dancing as we already have
I
with
won't
each.
be a strict interviewer by any
No,
stretch
you
of
will
the
not.
imagination. I'm an opinionated interviewer.
That's right. And we may disagree at times, which will be part of the fun that we want to share openly with the world here.
Yep, yep.
Well, with
So,
anybody that pays attention, not the whole world.
well, who knows, right? Why limit? Perhaps the
Good
whole
point.
world will see this video. Keith.
Good point.
Um, Good. Let's dive in. So this should be a fun and entertaining and educational exploration, and no doubt we'll touch on some depth. I'm hoping that you listening may find some application of this to your own life. This is not a purely abstract conversation here. So let's start, Keith, with the evolution of kind of the views and the definition of man through society, through history. Just a
Well, I
little.
don't know if I'm going to tackle the definition of man, but I
Yeah.
will. Historically, the definition, the current definition, the gender fluidity that existing in our current is casts a quite an interesting set of questions about who is man, what is man.
Mhm.
But we're going to go with a traditional understanding of it for now. And I will tell you, I've been thinking about it since we agreed to do this topic. And I very much welcome you riffing off of what I've been thinking about. So what I've been thinking about is the different eras of society
Mhm.
and how society's view or understanding of men or man has changed. Um, and then of course, we want to bring it up to current as much as we can here. But so I'm going to start with the hunter-gatherer. I don't know how to start pre-hunter-gatherer.
Hmm. Hmm.
Suppose we could play with what was Neanderthal man and
Not a lot of writing then.
Cro-Magnon.
We could look at chimps if we want.
We could make up a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
but starting with hunter-gatherer era, from what I'm my readings, and I know that there's not a lot of agreement among the anthropologists who study this and the archaeologists who study it. To what extent were human societies cooperative versus competitive is a big raging debate for which I'm not an expert in. But because of that debate, it raises questions about hierarchy, structure, and domination. But from most of the readings that I'm familiar with, would say that most of the hunter-gatherer communities within the community was pretty darn cooperative.
Hmm.
That against other communities, if some other community threatened us, I suppose we would rally. But within the community, there were fairly clearly lines of delineated roles. And the simplest one that we all know is that man go out hunt,
Hmm.
woman gather.
Hmm.
Woman take care of hearth and home. I don't know why I'm speaking. I'm speaking in caveman language right now. Women go out, men go out, women do this. But the women mostly stayed at home for
Hmm.
perhaps obvious reasons, took care of hearth and home, and gathered.
Hmm.
And the process of gathering is a uh, is a heartful experience. And so the heart of woman is very much present, I think, in early times. Man, primary job, seed woman with sperm, and go out and hunt
Hmm.
and bring back the bison, the mammoth, or whatever to add to the fuel that's available. And there are probably other certain things that they do that require a
Well,
certain degree of
certainly
skill.
protection and occasionally warfare and things like that.
I'm guessing mostly protection, but to the extent that some other community attacks us, then we might attack back. I don't know.
Hmm.
But yes, exactly that. So using the strength of muscle of man to go and run fast. And interestingly, it took a lot of cooperation among the men
Hmm. Oh, if you
to
want to hunt a
work with each
mammoth,
other.
that is not a singular activity.
Not
So,
at all. So they would work together in collaboration.
mhm.
Was there an uber, an alpha male that ran it? Maybe. I don't know that we have enough evidence to say yes or no. But in man in relationship to woman, I think was pretty equal.
Mm.
You do this, we do that. Let's support each other. It's a good deal. And why would I man respect woman and what she's doing. Woman respects man and what he's doing. Neither one is more important or less important. And so I think that it starts off with some semblance of cooperation and equality, I think.
Yeah,
And he
let me add to that if I may, because I've done some reading on this as well. And let me say that it varied from culture to culture and tribe to tribe how they dealt with these matters. So some would be more hierarchical than others, for example. Um, and there were some tribes in North America where the women chose the chief. And if the chief started to become too egotistical and power hungry, they'd replace him, that
yeah,
sort of thing. Um, there was one in particular I found fascinating. The tribes that hunted buffalo, the buffalo hunt was so important to the survival of the tribe that before and during the hunt, they would make a police force, and anyone who threatened the hunt, the police force could arrest, imprison, or even kill to preserve the hunt. But then when the hunt was over, the police force was disbanded. There was no
yeah,
structural hierarchy whatsoever, and everyone just kind of went home.
yeah.
And so there was a variety of um, different structures and systems and
I can
decision-making
believe
processes that varied wildly from culture to culture.
as it does now.
Yeah,
So I think that's enough for that, that
yeah.
time. It becomes really interesting from hunter-gatherer to agriculture and then beyond. And here's why, in my estimation. Most hunter-gatherer clans or tribes were about 150 people or less.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't get much larger than that. And that was ample to suit the needs of the tribe. There was also arguably, you know, 250,000 years ago, maybe only a couple million people on Homo sapiens on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And they were dispersed in mostly in Eurasia and in the Fertile Crescent and in Africa. Not much in the U.S. and in the Americas until later on when they
Mm-hmm.
moved across the I think it was the Bering Strait.
Yep.
Not sure from
Yeah,
Russia
there was
over
a
to
land bridge
Alaska.
that you could
Yeah.
walk if it was during the Ice Age, but yeah, that's when
Yeah,
they made it
so
over.
so these little clans just remained clans and didn't need to get any bigger, and they didn't get bigger. They would move, and moving 1,000 people is hard. Moving 100 people less hard. They would move as the seasons would move, and that was pretty much life for 250,000 years or so. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know that it is known exactly, but somewhere roughly around 10,000 years ago, give or take, generally in the Fertile Crescent, which is the area in Israel and Egypt and
Iraq,
in that
Fertile
Iraq, in
Crescent's
that
yeah.
area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm told in a couple other parts of the world, I don't remember where.
The Indus River Valley, the Yangtze River, and then there was one place in Central
Yangtze, I
America.
do remember somewhere in China. That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So something started to happen, probably because of the problem-solving abilities of human beings, cleverness, and for whatever other reasons, people started to go, oh, we're gathering, probably women, by the way, figured this
Mm-hmm.
out. We're gathering, and somebody, a seed fell and something sprouted, and we went, oh, wait, why don't we do that over and over again? Rather than going so far to gather, let's control this thing a little bit. We're in an area where there's plenty of Fertile Crescent, plenty of fertile stuff to be grown here. Let's just grow it right here.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, an idea was born. Who was the original one? I don't know, but be interesting to if make a movie to make up that it was somebody. And,
Natufians, I think, is the answer.
oh yes, thank you. Whoever the heck that is. So
Yeah.
so somewhere the idea of agriculture emerged, and it happened actually from a total scale of eternity pretty darn fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to spread pretty fast to the extent that tribes were somewhat nomadic and they passed along information somewhere in the Fertile Crescent and other places. They figured this out. What happened there was meaningful from a power standpoint and from everything we're going to be talking about, which is that, simply put, you could populate more and more people when you have agriculture.
Right.
So picture
and that's when you get cities and hierarchies and all this kind of
not
stuff.
yet cities yet, but large towns. That's
Mm-hmm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where power starts to emerge. So when you're a person who likes power,
Mm-hmm.
and some probably did even in the hunter-gatherer era, like to control things, but it's 150 people at most. These are your cousins, your brothers, your friends. You don't exhibit overlord kind of power in those situations. You have to actually exhibit power in a pretty healthy, kind, benevolent way, or police or whatever, others will react. When you start to grow the population more and more, now the people who do like power and do like influence start to go, ha, 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 ha.
Right.
There's a
More people
much
to control, but
larger
also it's
society.
depersonalizing, right? It's not my cousin, it's some random
Exactly.
person I'm controlling.
Exactly. There is born the controlling power overlord idea. And then, of course, some men in particular, perhaps women in some places, but mostly men to my knowledge, they started to use their power, their control, their bigness, their alphaness, and their wiles and their deception and other things to amass control over larger populations of people in that era.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean
And so
there were queens and pharaohs and whatnot, but they were definitely in the minority. So, yeah.
yeah. So I think the nature of man and power started to shift right then and there, from benevolence to sometimes not so much benevolent,
Mm-hmm.
and from clever use of politics in the system, interpersonal relationships. Thus is born, what did Lord Acton say? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The beginning embers of that was born in a city-state group of 1,000 or 1,200 or
And now
1,500.
you get the "my king is bigger than your king" thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in order to organize 1,000 people, you've got to have subdivisions, divisions of labor. You all do the farming, we'll do the fence making,
Mm-hmm.
or we'll do the cultivation of this,
Or
and
here
you
are the
all
priests, here are the surveyors, here are the carpenters.
differentiation of roles started to happen right then and there during the
So
agricultural in a
so
severe
back to
way.
the point of this conversation. So what effect did that have on the perception of man and men in society?
Well, I think men were generally equally respected with women. Ah, gosh, I'm not sure. Give me you have a thought about it? Because I have to think about that for a little bit. It's a good question.
Well, it seems like the bigger the structures got, the more the men tended to dominate the positions of power, and the greater the chances that there wasn't equality for women. So in
I,
Egyptian society, for ancient Egyptian society, the women actually had a lot of rights, um,
yes,
but more than they have now, perhaps, right,
yes.
in Egypt. So again, it really varied from society to society, but certainly the opportunity to have a lot of concentration of power and then to start to make that power associated with gender became greater under those conditions than it was under hunter-gatherer conditions,
I
to your
I
point.
believe that I believe that's likely true, and I now have a more of an answer to it. I think that's right. I also think that when you think about the male brain and how it's oriented, there's plenty of evidence now, and you can find it in the book Gender Intelligence that I co-wrote with Barbara Annis, and you can find it elsewhere, that there are meaningful differences in the brain,
Absolutely.
not the structure, but some parts of the brain form more with women than with men, and vice versa.
Yeah, processing of images, processing of sound, processing of emotion, the corpus callosum, all sorts of different
All
things.
of that, and the key one is the ability to compartmentalize,
Mm-hmm.
which men develop quite quickly early on, and they're taught how to do that quickly early on. We're in our society, they're taught how to do that. Women aren't taught necessarily how to do that. They're taught how to connect and do tasks while having emotions and larger corpus callosum, etc. So here's the men. In order for them to hunt the mammoth, they have to be very strategic,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to compartmentalize because they're about to go into a situation where they can easily get killed. And in order to do that well and keep your wits about you, you got to compartmentalize your feelings and shove them
Yeah,
aside.
so if I'm angry at you, I have to set that aside while we're hunting the mammoth. I can beat you up later, but while we're hunting the mammoth, that's got to be off the table.
Moreover, if I'm afraid of the mammoth, I got to put that fear aside.
Mm-hmm.
So that capacity to compartmentalize, now take that same capacity and now imagine a man who's wanting power. They're going to strategize. They're going to be political and clever in solving the problem, not defeating the mammoth,
Mm-hmm.
but in taking control over society.
Mm-hmm.
All of those skills that are available in defeating mammoth now get applied to garnering power.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the birth of politics in a sense,
So
right
let's
around.
fast forward because we're covering,
Oh yeah,
we got more ground to cover here. So
yeah. All right, so take that. Now you go into the merchant era, which is the next major era, and now the roles differentiate even more. Society is highly
well, and then
differentiated.
stratified, where you have the nobles and then the freemen and then the slaves and the serfs and whatnot. So you got all these
Yeah,
caste systems.
I think it's simply taking that very thing that was birthed in the agricultural era and taking it to its far extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Um, now you have city-states of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in the merchant era, and you've got money, money becoming a prominent part of the exchange between cultures, between societies, and between jobs. Money was birthed as a means for exchange in the merchant era, roughly 3000 BC, give or take, maybe 4000 BC, the merchant era became. Major city states, power, it just accentuates that use of power in order to reign supreme. It's during that time, by the way, interestingly, that a lot of the kings claimed they had direct access to God,
Or
or
were
they
gods themselves.
were seen as mini gods themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they happily perpetuated that.
Right.
Exactly, more and more power. Yeah.
So you get the pharaoh who is a god, Roman emperor who is a god, and then you have the European kings who are divinely chosen by God. You know. So
Yes, exactly. And what did they do? Pillage, plunder, kill, defeat, attack, take over other cities, all for power for its own sake. The experience of I just want more and more and more. This is where kind of the power starts to go awry and really, and we all know, we watch movies about those eras and the Vikings and the this and that's, and it's an expression of kill, defeat, maim, a lot, very ugly, I
mm-hmm.
think, emerging toward that time. That's my judgment call about it.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose if you like maiming and murdering, then it might be pleasurable, but
I might enjoy it more than you, perhaps.
I doubt it, but maybe. At any rate, so I don't know that it changed meaningfully other than the men and people in positions of power got really, really skillful. Really, really, and you had
This
to
is
deal
when
with
you get
other.
Machiavelli writing The Prince and that sort of thing. Right?
Exactly, because other people in positions of power are now absolute direct threats with big armies, and I've got to be clever to defend or attack. If I want to amass more power, I got to learn how to attack. If I want to defend from others amassing power, I got to learn how to defend. And warfare definitely gets quite prominent. There was a little bit of warfare in the agriculture era where some people would steal other people's supply. The corn over there, we haven't developed our corn very well, so we're going to go and steal their corn in their area, and then we got to defend against that. But it really got quite popular in the merchant era, and then of course in the industrial era. Not sure it was meaningfully different in the industrial era. Just got better and better weapons and more destruction possibility.
Now,
So
these highly differentiated roles, this really started to break down in the last 100 years here, and especially in the last 50. So,
between men and women.
yeah.
Oh yeah, so we should probably fast forward to current time. So I think a lot of this simply accentuated in the industrial era, and now you could say we're the next era. Many people call it the communication era, media, and then quickly the digital era, which we are in now. And then what is the next era? I don't know, but we're in the digital era.
When we all work for the AIs, I think that'll be a new era. So.
Oh, maybe that. So interesting eras get shorter and shorter over
Yep.
time too.
Yep.
Definable differences. I'm not sure men in power were much different in industrial than they were in the merchant era. But in the communication era, and now in the current era, I think that the understanding of men and women is changing as we understand some of the beautiful differences between men and women, and also some of the gifts that all, regardless of men and women, bring. A changing of roles has been happening, really accelerated in the 60s and the 70s, where women no longer hunt and gatherers and no longer need to be sitting at home and taking care of kids. They're equally capable. Why? Because we're in the knowledge era. In the communication, the digital era, it's the knowledge era, where success or failure is usually due to your intelligence and your
Well, I
know-how.
would argue that there was always a percentage of women who had the wherewithal to be warriors, for example, and it
Oh yeah.
varied from culture to culture whether that was permitted. So in Christian Europe, no, unless you were Joan of Arc. In Vikings, yeah, the women were
Yeah.
women who were suitably capable could put on armor and go on raids.
Absolutely.
Um,
All men and women, we fall in a bell-shaped curve, and the ones that enjoy the protection, women who enjoy protecting and who are strong and capable, and they gravitate toward that. And some men would go, no, not me. I'm not going there at all. So it blurs a little bit there, but it's still, that differentiation is pretty strong. When it moves toward the knowledge era or communication or digital era, now knowledge is crucial. Your ability to think things through. Men have no greater ability than women in thinking things through and problem solving. And we know, for example, we used to believe that women were not as good in math. That was a traditional thought, a bunch of horseshit. Very capable. Men were better, women were better, or so the thought. That has changed enormously, where I don't see any evidence of differing intelligence. There's certainly different kinds of intelligence, but cognitive intelligence, which is crucial in the knowledge era, equally capable. And this is why, little by little, you see men used to take over these roles because it was traditionally expected in many ways. But as the 60s broke down those expectations, now we see lots of women moving up, rightly so. I think we have a problem now with men and boys, in some sense more than women. But nowadays, I think the idea that men has to be in control or in charge versus women, it's disappearing, thankfully. And appropriately, it may have belonged in a different era, but it belongs differently now.
So what's the cost of that, though? There's an upside, right? That now men and women have greater freedom to adopt a wide variety of roles and relationship styles and sexuality and any number of things. But when you remove those traditional boundaries and guidelines and roles and structures, there's got to be some cost to that. What's the downside of that?
Well, I think it can get confusing sometimes. I think for a woman that wants to take care of children and wants to be a leader in corporations or in organizations, it becomes a little harder. They have to navigate that. And I know some women that go, I don't know if I want to lose that time with my children, especially that early time. Do I give it up to a nanny? I think there's some questions that it poses, especially for women who want both. It poses some questions for men who want both too. And it's not quite fully accepted in society, in most societies, that men will take care of the kids, but they do. I think I think it's just an
I changed
emergent.
a lot of diapers. I don't know about you. So,
Oh, I did. Happily so.
I can't say I did so happily. It was definitely
okay, fair enough.
a
Fair
labor
enough.
of love.
Willingly so. Willingly so. So fair enough.
Willingly, yes.
But I think there's some of that gets sorted out. I think it's a personal thing that people need to do. But from a society standpoint, at least in most more advanced cultures, I'm going to use that perhaps judgmental term, the lines are blurred, and happily so, and it's not a problem, including women moving more and more into military. And the military has had to figure out, how do we bring the women in, and do we create a new, different bathroom for them? And for a while, the military was resistant, but now the military is much more open to
Well,
men and
actually,
women.
most people don't understand that the reason it took the military so long to put women in roles of combat was Congress. The military was ready to do it back in the 80s, and
Yeah.
Congress wouldn't let them. So
And that's because a lot of
I
Congress,
was in the military at the time, and that was a
I
question
believe
on the
you.
Sailor of the Month test,
Yes.
which the other guy got wrong.
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Anyway, so I think in the military, it for a while it's raised some challenges, but a lot of the military is not might anymore. It's not personal physical might anymore.
Right. A lot of button pushing or flying a plane or stuff like that.
Flying a little, what are those
A
things?
drone. Yeah.
A drone. Yeah. And it's very strategic and very technical, and men and women equally capable. And so you see a lot more women going, okay, I want to protect the democracy, or I want to protect our country, and so I'll move in there too. I don't see it as a major problem, but it certainly has taken some time to adjust. what it has done for those men that are wedded to my role as man, and
Hmm.
where the rightful place in the home is man in control.
Hmm.
Now I'm torn and caught and somewhat confused about how to navigate that, because society is not so happy with me
Hmm. Right.
establishing.
If I take that position, that's now an unpopular position. So
Yeah, and also unpopular for women to take the subordinate role.
right. If she
And yet,
wants to be, she could get judged for that. So
right. So as societies change, I think in some religions, the role is well defined. But as we get more and more more and more information is available to all cultures throughout the world, women who have been historically kept in a certain role, they start to see these other cultures and they go, oh, wait a sec.
wait a
Yeah,
minute.
we ought to rethink this.
Yep.
And then some happily don't. Some happily stay within the roles that have been defined historically, and they're happy. But I think it's not confusion, but an adjustment of expectations that's happening throughout the world is
Hmm.
in a beautiful way, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to get to the concern about man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think when the role for man, and we can probably talk about the same for women, but you and I have perhaps a little more expertise on
We have
man.
more of a mission to men than women, you and I,
Yeah, I think so. But we certainly do in
in
these
this
days.
context.
Yeah. And for a man, you can imagine easily, I've got these parts of me that are and that do like to protect and do like to defend and sometimes do attack. And I compartmentalize. I've got all these capacities that are now less accepted and relevant.
Ancient features that are still part of the system and not going anywhere.
And if exactly, where do I go with it and how do I
Where do I
express
put
it
that?
is a huge problem for men in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
I'm a white
And
middle-aged guy, I got other problems too. But go ahead.
sure.
Were you going to?
Yeah. One of the on the one hand, there are men who don't want to inhabit that traditional stuff, and they're much more freed now, as they should be, as you said, to create or adopt whatever role they want. And the ones who kind of liked the old system are screwed. Um, and I see a couple of different things happening with that. In societies that got shifted from an old system to a new system very abruptly, like Pacific Islanders, say,
Mhm.
there's a lot of alcoholism, depression, suicide, and domestic violence,
Yeah,
because there's no place to put that identity that I held, or my father or my grandfather held. It doesn't have a home anymore. Now I don't know who I am. I have these impulses and these things, but they're no longer respected, and there's no longer a place for them. Um, Another thing I see in the U.S. and some other societies is a harking back to the good old days, trying to
yeah,
reassert the old system and sort
yes,
of make the new, more confusing stuff go away. Um,
yeah, yeah,
which, I can certainly have empathy for the fear or need behind the impulse, but boy, is that a losing battle to try
yeah,
to undo all that change.
yeah,
And then a lot of men just kind of sort of confused and muddling through. Um,
yeah. Oh yeah, it's going to be different for each individual, depending upon a lot of factors, including how much testosterone is coursing through my body.
mhm.
But the more those raw energies that are in me as a man, there's not much place for them. And the tender qualities that are in me are not necessarily quite as developed. This is partly why so many men in the 60s and 70s developed these tender parts, but they threw out temporarily some of these raw, I'm man.
Right,
I
which
want to go
makes
after,
it hard to compete in business, for example. In some
yeah.
cases, hard to attract a mate, depending on who you're trying to attract. So,
So I think it's so rapidly in the past 30, 40 years, the changing understanding of how man adds value has changed dramatically. And I, as man, or I, typical man, are left with questions. How do I be myself? How do I be authentic? I don't want to be fully domesticated, but I've got to be somewhat domesticated, partly because the expectations of society, the
well, yeah, if
expectations
there's
of my
7
wife
or
or
8 billion of us living on the planet, we have to be somewhat domesticated if we're going to survive as a species.
and and so what do I do with the raw energies? Where do I go with it? In a healthy way? I think that's the question that's up for men in many places throughout the world.
Yeah, yeah. And what can we do about that, Keith?
Oh, well, I think it's sort of kind of happening. I think you and I and other people are raising these questions.
Hmm.
I think we form in our tribe of men or group of men here in the Bay Area. We get together and we support each other in exploring how do we be more healthy expression of ourselves. That's happening in little dollops dotted throughout the world. And I think it's a good thing that men get together separate from women and share what some of their own struggles as it relates to all of these things, and find, usually there's one or two or more men in our circles who say, here's a way to think about it that'll help you through. And so mentoring other men, older men mentoring younger men, guiding us through it is happening. And that's definitely one of the things. What are your thoughts? What else can and is being done about it? Aha, you didn't expect me to be the interviewer.
No, no, I'm trying to remember the name of the poet I was going to quote, but I'm terrible with names. Wrote Iron John. What's his name?
Robert Bly? No,
Robert
not Robert
Bly.
Bly did not write. Yeah, Robert Bly. He wrote Iron
Yeah,
John.
yeah, yeah. So he made a statement that men learn in ritual, and it struck me very deeply when I heard it. It was funny. Logically, I was like, "What is he talking about?" But some much deeper part of me said, "Uh huh." I was like, "Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I need to figure out what's going on there." And as you know, Keith, like it's such a different thing to engage with this question of who am I as a man, and what do I do with these parts of myself that, because we contain parts from all these eras that you name, right? They're all in
Yes.
there,
Yes.
rattling around in our psyche. Um,
Yes.
well, how do I find them gainful employment? How do I bring them forth in positive
Yeah.
ways? Those questions posed in ritual produce a very different outcome than posing those same questions intellectually or in therapy or some context like
Or
that.
in reaction and anger.
Hmm. Hmm.
We hold a
Right. Or in a
circle,
political context. Yeah.
right? Hold a
Yeah.
circle, calm and regulate the system down, and then wonder together, what does it require of me and others?
Hmm.
That's when it's done in a healthy way, that's what's happening. When it's done in a healthy way, the men who are threatened by it are just shooting and killing
Yeah.
and perpetuating, warfare. But there's a bunch of others who are doing that. And you mentioned parts.
Hmm.
It's I think the emergence of an understanding of the human psyche as made up of parts
Hmm.
is quite useful and powerful, and it's emerging more and more as a healthy way of understanding
Right. Part of
ourselves.
me feels this way and part of me feels that way. And
Right.
they're
I'm
having a little
stuck.
argument in my head.
Exactly. And where do I go with it?
Yeah.
And who governs that battle? Is there something else possible? And this is a lot of what we're doing in our workshop, the Sword and Scepter,
Hmm.
is the invitation of a wise self
Hmm.
or a sovereign self emerging that can answer the question, where do I go with all of this stuff, in a healthy way? That's kind of what we're doing in our work, is really inviting that.
And creating that ritual space to explore these questions of identity and power and masculinity and because the roles have been deconstructed, The challenge and the opportunity is I have to reconstruct it for myself.
Yeah.
And so you listening, you get to you have to, and you get to reconstruct it for yourself. And what's the appropriate environment in which to do that? And that's what I love so much about the Sword and Scepter workshop.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll probably talk about it a little more later, but it's a 4-day experience. Right now, we might make it 3, we might make it 7, I don't know. But it's a 4-day experience, and it's not men talking about these things. We'll talk about it some in the series of these recordings, but it's men being thrust into an experience over and over for which they can find their deeper capacity, their sovereign capacity to be authentically expressed in the world. And it's different for different men. There are different phases of their life. There are different phases of their journey toward a healthy masculinity, but they get to explore and find and kind of congeal whoever they are emerging to be as a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we're doing, as I see it.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in September in California.
Yeah.
So,
and interesting, a lot of women I know go, I'm glad you men are doing that,
yeah,
because
take my guy.
yeah, because you, my loved one, or my friend, and it could be, of course, gay couple, you, my partner,
right?
Doesn't matter, are expressing your masculine in wonky ways here in our relationship, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and it's not really my role to fix that. Go get it sorted. And
Go
let
and
me know
take a
how it
look.
went. Yeah.
Take a look at yourself in deep ways, and I want you to come back healthy, strong, but not wonky like you seem to be showing up from time to time here.
Yep.
I don't know that men were terribly wonky in the hunter-gatherer eras, but there's a lot of
Well, I'm sure
wonkiness
somewhere, but I
somewhere.
imagine they had a way of dealing with it. If you're wonky
Right.
enough, you didn't get fed.
Well, that's you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Everybody clear about that wonky behavior? Good. We're good.
Good. Yeah. Excellent. Any closing thoughts for our audience, Keith, about this evolution of man and society's view of men? And
Whoever that audience is, we're going to share this with the men in our community and their friends, and we're going to also put it on YouTube. If you're watching it, it already is on YouTube, and we're hoping that you share it with others and be in the question that we're going to be sharing. We're going to be doing this about once a month.
something like that. Yep.
And how long we'll do it, I don't know.
Probably
But
5 or 6 times,
this
I
was
would
fun.
imagine. So
This
yeah.
was fun.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Well, you too, and thank you for saying it's wisdom. It feels right. It feels true, and we're both going to be sharing, as we are right now, how we see things, and so it's been fun.
Yeah, excellent. And those of you watching, hope you enjoyed it. Join us again next time, and we hope to see you in the fall at the Sword and Scepter workshop. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, Tim.